Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon keynote session. I hope that you are all enjoying all of the different sessions here at NABE thus far. My name is Yee Wan, and I'm one of the executive board members at NABE. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kenji Hakuta. Dr. Hakuta is the Lee Jacks Professor of Education at Stanford University. He has been at Stanford since 1989. Dr. Hakuta is the author of many research papers and books on language, bilingualism, and education, including Mirror of Language, Bilingualism, and also in educational policies. And he has been a strong advocate for bilingual learners. And he has testified in Congress on behalf of our bilingual learners. And Dr. Hakuta has served as a fellow of the American Education Research Association and the fellow of the American Association for Advancement of Science, recognized for his accomplishment in the linguistic and language of English learners. And he has served on the board of various organizations, including the Educational Testing Service, the Spencer Foundation, and the New Teacher Center. He currently leads the Understanding Language Initiative that addresses the challenges and opportunities of the Common Core State Standards for bilingual learners. Dr. Hakuta has been a longtime friend and supporter of NABE. And please join me in welcoming this outstanding researcher and scholar who works tirelessly to ensure equal educational opportunity for our nation's bilingual learners. Welcome, Dr. Hakuta.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this okay? I don't actually like standing in front of these lights, so I might wander down that way eventually as we start. It's really it's been a few years since I was last at NABE, probably 6 or 7 years. But I think so. What I'd like to do is to kind of think about where we are right now at this moment, 2013, with respect to bilingual education, English language learners, and educational equity, and I think we are. You know, if I were to sort of gauge my own sense of optimism about whether we're at a time of peril or opportunities and so forth, I mean, I think there are definite perils always out there. We have a lot of challenges in educating English language learners, both in their native language and in English, but that we're, I think, at a good moment, partly because of what I'll be focusing on, which is the waves created by the Common Core and the opportunities that are created by that, and also trying to address the challenges that are created by that, and that's the work that I'll address. But also, I think that historically, that we are at a different time, and so, for example, I just threw up a slide. It's a somewhat dated slide, but because it's dated 2010. But Science Magazine carried an article about the benefits of bilingualism or multilingualism, focusing on the research of Ellen Bialystock and her colleagues up in Canada. And the New York Times has picked up on some of this work. You're probably quite familiar with the line of work that especially addresses the area of executive function in cognitive processing, but also some kind of basically geriatric work relating bilingualism to the delay of onset of dementia among bilinguals. And it's really interesting watching the public reaction to those studies, because it gets a lot more press. I did some of that work in the 80s. At which it was mainly met with great skepticism. And Ellen's coverage of Ellen's work, or Ellen Bialystock's work, in Science Times last year was, for about a week, it was the most forwarded article in the New York Times. And so I think it gives you a sense that things are different, that people are starting to kind of finally get the message about the real positive effects of bilingualism, that we shouldn't think of English language learners as a deficit, but that that there's good research that's finally starting to get absorbed. And so the other piece is that I think the demographics and the latest elections really prove this. I think that using bilingualism or English only or fear of other languages as sort of a wedge issue in politics, because I think immigration itself is kind of a leading edge and a highly related topic, but efforts such as this one, which is fortunately already more than 15 years ago, Prop 227 in California, those movements have seen their limits, right? And so I think we could safely say that was the only sound effect I have for this. I can do it again. So I think we could say that we're done with that, and so that we are living in a different time when bilingualism is much more valued, the research base for it is much more acknowledged, and the political environment is such that people are having to embrace the diversity that comes with immigration and with languages. So I think that's my optimistic note that we are in a different time when we could have these conversations. Add to that the number of dual immersion programs that have cropped up throughout the country, and I think that we're in much better situation. So what I'm going to do for the next half hour or so is to talk about some of the big ripples that come from the Common Core and what it means for English language learners, because that's the kind of terrain that I've been working in. I just came from a meeting of the Council of Chief State School Officers, which has a network that has a terrible acronym, but it's called SCAS, and SCASS. It's the State Collaborative for Student Assessment or whatever. It's around assessment and standards, and they're part of the kind of one of the key players in the development of the Common Core, and I advise the ELL SCAS network, and it is right now the most engaged SCAS group. It's about 35 state leaders, and they're just really kind of energized by the Common Core, and partly it's because of both the challenges and opportunities that I think it's bringing to us. I don't think I would take a public position myself as to whether if like I woke up one morning and the Common Core wasn't there and I decided, what am I going to do today? I'm not sure that I would have said, okay, I'm going to come up with a Common Core state standards in English language arts, literacy, and math. So I throw this picture of a surfer in here that, if you're working in this space, you almost have to think of yourself as a surfer, which is you're not creating the wave. Right? The wave is there, it's sort of there, and you sort of decide whether and how to address its properties and what to do about it. And what's really dramatic, I think, about the Common Core when you take a particular angle in looking at it is that the Common Core, and we've also at Understanding Language been focused on the next generation science standards. The draft is up for public review right now. That they offer this new and important perspective on the role of language in content learning that needs to be supported by instructional shifts. So that's really, if you're going to take away one sort of observation from this afternoon, I hope this is what it is. That, and why am I showing you pictures of camels while I'm talking about it? It's because what you see are actually the shadows of the camel, right? It's not, the camels themselves are the little white things that look, if you were in Florida, you would think if you didn't see the shadows, you might think they're crocodiles, or are they alligators? Gators, right, alligators, sorry. So you would think that they're alligators or something, but you can't see the humps on them if you're looking directly from the top. And it's only because of the particular time of day that the sun was way low, and you get the shadows of the camels projected. This is a picture by National Geographic photographer George Steinmetz. And so this is just to say that the Common Core portrays language demands in a way that really requires a shift in the way that all students are given opportunities for language. And I would contrast that with other standards. Right now we have different standards in different states, and California has its own set of standards, and you guys have something in Florida. And we could think about the historical context for English learners where we are today as sort of a series of waves that started with Lau v. Nichols, 1974. That was a court action that said, you have to pay attention to both the language acquisition needs of students as well as content access. The wave of reforms that came through ESEA, that was initially Title VII, and then the sort of accountability pieces that got imposed on Title VII during the Clinton administration era, the Improving America's Schools Act of 1993, I think, and that was responding to a nation at risk, which is that picture on the left-hand upper left-hand side of the National Commission on Excellence in Education, 1982, that started the standards movement, right? And that's what gave rise to the first wave of standards, including the TESOL standards and so forth, the NCTM standards, and that got implemented through federal policy into state laws, and then those pieces got teeth, still state by state under No Child Left Behind. So that's where we got, and they were sort of responding to these words this is from No Child Left Behind. I mean, what they did was they talked about inclusion of LEP students in the programs to give access to the content standards. I'm not asking you to read this. Nobody wants to spend the afternoon reading words from the law, but the words I've highlighted is really around, the Title I is around inclusion of students, of English language learners, so it's really, that brings the attention of Title I on LEP students, and the disaggregation of results is a big piece, and we're in the period right now of debating, we're debating whether to debate the reauthorization of the ESEA, and with this Congress, you never know what will happen. But and most people love to hate No Child Left Behind. But the one piece in there that's really, really important from my point of view is the disaggregation of data, although it's very imperfectly done. So the reauthorization has to address proper or appropriate disaggregation of the results for English learners that includes the results for reclassified or redesignated English learners, because otherwise you're always looking at the kids who aren't meeting reclassification. But you need to change that, but in any event, the disaggregation piece is really important, I think, because it otherwise could elude the attention of school districts or states for English language learners. And then Section 3, the 3000s part, which introduced the English language proficiency standards and the assessments aligned to it, and also the alignment of the English language proficiency standards with the content standards. Right? Nobody knows how to do that well, or it's been a challenge. And this law basically said it will happen, and it's in there. And that's how you ended up with AMA 03. So Common Core came along. What is understanding language? It's really not anything other than 2 words and a group of people. Myself and Maria Santos, who is the deputy superintendent in Oakland Unified in California, and she was the ELL director in New York City for many years, had a very distinguished career there. And she and I kind of co-lead this effort so that we have both kind of research and practice represented. And then what's I think kind of characterizes this group is that we have and I don't see if because of the lights, I can't see your faces. So I don't, there probably are some people from this set of pictures who are in the audience, probably Oki Lee somewhere in there, who's talking later on today. But but the main characteristics of this group, and we have a website, and you can go to it and download all of our content. It's ell.stanford.edu or Google Understanding Language. And but the key features of this group that I would highlight is that it includes the leaders of, or some of the leaders of the content areas represented in the Common Core. So Susan Pimentel from who was one of the lead writers for the English Language Arts standards, and Phil Darrow, who worked in the math standards, and Helen Quinn, who was the chair of the National Research Council committee that developed the framework for next generation science standards, and then the current standards were written around that framework. And so, so the 3 of them are involved, along with people who have worked on English language learner issues in those content areas. So George Bunch from UC Santa Cruz in English language arts, social studies, Oki Lee from New York University, who works in science, and Judith Moskovich, who works in math. And so we have those people, and then we have various sort of practitioners. Aida Walke, many of you are probably familiar with. And then we have advocates like Delia Pompa, and we have representation from 2 partner organizations that we work closely with, the Council of Great City Schools. Gabriel Uro from there works in our group, and until recently, Chris Minnick from the Council of Chief State School Officers, and now he's actually executive director of that organization and doesn't have time to do this, but we still have the CCSSO involvement. And what we did was we focused on the major language-related shifts. You know, when people talk about the Common Core, they're full of shift language. They tell you about all the shifts that, if you delete that F, there's also another word there, but there's language-related shifts in the new standards that you want to focus on. And one of the things, so these are things around, you know, speaking and listening in order to work collaboratively and present ideas in English language arts, text-based evidence, the math, you know, math talks a lot about understanding the reasoning of others and supporting mathematical discussions. You'll find these especially in the practice standards. And then in science, around constructing scientific explanations, communicating information, argument from evidence, and so forth. There's a lot of peer language characterization of language in the next generation science standards. And those are the pieces of language. Those are really the areas that we pay attention to. So what we're saying is that these new standards raise the bar for learning, for sure. That's one of their intent. But from our point of view, they raise the demand for language. Right? They're the shadows of the camel from the standards, the content standards point of view. And they call for a high level of classroom discourse across all subject areas. And that's going to really require, I think, from an instructional and a leadership point of view, a big shift in how we currently do our practice. Right? Because what the implicit theory of learning around the role that language plays in content is that student-to-student arguments, discussions, and building on each other's reasoning is a primary vehicle by which students' knowledge develops. Right? So it's really student-to-student, academically related discourse. And those are the pieces that you'd want to look at. And so if you were to think of the old paradigm of the relationship between content and language, so think about that piece in Title III, which talks about the alignment of language and content. Right? And this is a caricature, but many of you will recognize what this caricature. If you were to think of the overlap as being primarily focused on vocabulary and grammar, right, and maybe that might be what PSYOP support might the language objectives might focus on, or that might be what some of the content-focused ELD might focus on. That in the new paradigm, there, okay. It includes many other pieces of language. It doesn't exclude vocabulary and grammar, but that it's really in the service of discourse and explaining texts and argumentation and purpose, and these are the higher order pieces of language that's called for in the Common Core. So, and then furthermore, we're saying that there are some real discipline-specific language practices that one needs to pay attention to in addition to just sort of what we might call academic words or academic language that cuts across disciplines. There are certainly language practices that do cut across disciplines, but we also need to pay attention to the discipline-specific texts. There, okay. So, what are students challenged to under this new paradigm? To engage in productive oral and written group work with peers, to engage in effective oral and written interactions with teachers, to explain and demonstrate their knowledge using emerging complex language and other communicative strategies in different settings, and extracting meaning from complex written texts. So those are the sorts of challenges, and that there are these changes in thinking about language. I don't expect you to read or follow this, and many of you would be quite familiar with this. You can download this information again from our website. There's a really wonderful paper by, among one of the tabs you'll find in the website is the papers. And this is written, I'm going to struggle to say this without getting a little bit emotional, but the late Leo Van Leer and Aida Walke. So this is, they have a paper on sort of what language means in the context of the Common Core. And unfortunately, Leo is no longer with us. But that paper really contains many of the what you see here of moving from thinking about language acquisition as an individual process to more of a social process, an apprenticeship that takes place in social context. So it really is talking about the discourse and the social uses around language. And what we're trying to do through our initiative is to try to embed these changes in thinking about the role of language in content into the structures that we have out there that we have to work with as practitioners, which are the standards, what we think about as sort of content, the language supports in the content instruction through various strategies that are out there, the assessments that are out there. And so that's what I'm asking you to be part of as we move this the national dialogue along. And what am I? Oh, right. Sorry. What we have are both. Oops, having a little bit of a delayed reaction here. So, yeah. So we focus we talk about instructional changes, but we also. I think I found the sweet spot here. that there are also institutional shifts that need to happen. So, you know, I'm always fascinated by I mean, personally, as an academic who studied both kind of the language as well as cognition, basically language and content, I'm always fascinated by how that relationship gets played out at different levels of professional discourse, and they do get played out somewhat differently, but you know, among teachers working in a professional community within a school, or you know, within school districts, and how different offices or people who hold different roles within school districts, the ELD person, the curriculum specialist, and so forth, how they talk to each other, or how people at state levels, like the SCAS meeting that I just came from, you know, how those conversations happen, or what happens at the federal level, which is not much of a conversation, but you know, but there is a conversation that is attempted when reauthorization and those sorts of things happen, and but in all cases, I think what it really calls for is the sort of support where the institution almost needs to model what it is that we're saying. That is, that our knowledge and our, you know, kind of the practice should emerge from what we're saying, which is through discourse, through language that isn't a monologue, but one where you know, build on ideas of others and so forth, right? And that's not easy, especially in the way in which many school districts are structured, the way in which many schools are organized, the way in which instruction is organized, or even, you know, for all, you know, when you try to sort of separate out a block of time in ELD in order to say that you're doing something different, because you need to, and you have to do that. But if you do that, then it sort of creates a barrier that you have to work again, you know, you have to kind of work to jump over when you're talking about connecting or aligning content and language. Right? So those are, I think, really important things that we as adults have to figure out how to work around and address. We're trying to communicate it in various ways, and we have partners that work with us on this. Next week, or in 2 weeks, we're having a briefing, for example, at the Alliance for Excellent Education in Washington, and they're one of the big kind of policy players around Common Core implementation, working at the state level. And they have a document which I think is quite useful. Although it has a lot of, I mean, this is somewhat self-serving, because it carries a lot of the implications of what Understanding Language has been putting out forward into the policy arena. And they try to communicate those arrows that I had earlier into in other forms, but you'll recognize them. They're about the shifts or the changes that need to happen from teaching language independent of academic content, and sequential building of structures and vocabulary aimed at correctness and fluency, and language as an individual process, to sort of policies that support more participation, opportunities for extended language learning within the content area classrooms, and so forth. And, you know, as an academic, I feel like, you know, I publish a paper and I get it out there and then I'm done. But in this world, you really need to say the same thing over and over and over again. And it's almost like South Park, where, you know, you take a word and you just repeat it 100 times. But that this, you know, what's conveyed by this about the role of language and the shifts that are needed in the way we think about language in content instruction really just needs to be repeated. The messaging is really important, and there's kind of a window of opportunity open right now for those kinds of conversations to take place. So one of the mechanisms, and I highly recommend you to take a look at this the CCSSOELPD Framework. It has an incredibly wonkish title, Framework for English Language Proficiency Development Standards corresponding to the Common Core State Standards and the Next Generation Science Standards. And so don't use this as bedtime reading well, unless you want to fall asleep. But this is a document that was intended for standards people who work at connecting standards. And this document was produced because of the waiver requirement in the ESEA flexibility process. One condition of which was that states had to provide an assurance that they would adopt standards in ELP that correspond to the Common Core. And so because states were desperate, they signed that. They said, of course, we'll do that by 2013. And then after they signed it, they said, how would we do that, right? And this was a document that was developed by a number of people. Gary Cook was from WIDA was involved, Mariana Castro from WIDA also, as well as Guadalupe Valdez and Aida Walke, and Susan Pimentel was involved in it. But basically what they did was they took the content standards and said, what are the language demands contained in those standards that we could highlight and put into a framework for what ELP standards need to address as well, right? It doesn't mean, and so in a sense, what it does is it doesn't address the kind of beginner ELD issues, but it does address the language demands across all levels of the proficiency continuum, recognizing that students are going to take time to develop all aspects of second language. And this framework has worked its way into the various state standards that are being developed right now. California, California moved ahead before this document was released, but there was a conversation that took place that influenced the California ELD standards. New York certainly worked on this, and they have, and New York is, unlike California, wasn't attacked by Ron Unz, and so New York could talk about a bilingual Common Core, and they're working on that. The nice thing about the Common Core from the viewpoint of bilingualism and advocating for bilingualism is that this is true in any language. I mean, it's not about English language development. It's really about the way in which language is used in academic instruction. It also poses the same kinds of challenges when you think about it that it does for in the English learning context for bilingualism. That is, we're asking for a highly amped up use of language in ways that promote student-to-student meaningful, academically relevant exchanges, right, using language. That is going to happen across subject areas, right, where the content teachers start understanding better what it means to be a teacher of the language use in the discipline, and that it doesn't matter whether it's English or Spanish or Vietnamese, right? That these are all languages in which, if you're going to offer bilingual programs, you need to get the students to be using the language for those purposes, and the teachers to be supporting that. Right? So it's a real. I think it poses a pretty high bar for instruction, but it's really exciting to think that, oh yeah, there's a real purpose here, and we need to really think about how we're going to accomplish that. And I think there's real room for innovation there. I think that any opportunity for teachers to be able to listen to what their students are saying in their language, and I've been experimenting with an app on my iPhone, just a voice recorder, and just when I visit classrooms or schools, I'll just put it down where students are engaged in either think, pair, share or some kind of activity and see what kind of language I could capture. And it's really insightful, actually, and unfortunately it's insightful in how difficult it is to find situations where students are having meaningful and extended discourse. I mean, that's just not part of practice. But when you capture something like that, it's quite exciting. Right? And when you share that with teachers, they get excited because it's a version of student work. And so I think that there's a lot of room for innovation in how we could leverage technology, how we could just even engineer changes in the way that coaches and instructional leaders engage in classroom walkthroughs and what they listen for, which is not for the teacher, but not for the students, and not what the students are saying. If you don't believe me, go and look at various teaching websites. So you can go to the teaching channel, which is one of the more kind of, they have beautiful videos of teachers, and they have Common Core aligned instruction. And go hunt for videos that have examples of good capturing of student language, and you won't find too many. There are few, but they're oriented very much in the way that we've all been oriented in thinking about teaching, which is what's the teacher saying? How are they teaching? Right? And so they focus on what the teacher is saying and how they're organizing and so forth. There's a little bit of incidental student chatter in there. But the focus really should be on what the students are doing and what they're saying. And so I think I'm going to get the hook very soon. So I recommend that you go to websites like that. And if you start listening for it, you'll find that there's sort of mainly silence. I promised to talk a little bit about what understanding language does, and we don't really have we're not an organization, so we don't really have a strategic plan or anything like that. We just kind of find opportunities and work, and we'll just keep going until foundations get tired of funding us, and then we'll stop. But but this is my one effort to try to to explain publicly what we're doing. So again, we're just a loosely organized group of people who collaborate with lots of people and lots of organizations. Yee Wan and the county offices in the Bay Area, we're trying to do a little collaboration, because without county office involvement, the smaller school districts in California don't get any support. Certainly not coming from the state. So we're kind of in the center of this thing, trying to connect language and content and having meaningful discourse. In the bottom, you'll see the Council of Great City Schools, CGCS, and so one of the things you'll find on our website, we just developed, kind of what we say is, okay, this is great in theory. How does this get done? And we just developed. It almost felt like giving birth to a child. Not that I would know what that's like, but an instructional unit, middle school ELA. And so if you go to teaching resources in our website, you'll see a very elaborate instructional unit around persuasive message. I think it's called Persuasion Across Time and Space. That was developed by a subgroup of us working with Aida Walke at West Ed. That leads up to one of the kind of prototypical Common Core texts, which is Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And embedded in that unit is a lot of scaffolding and opportunities to get students up to that level of the text, reading other texts, having activities that support student language use in it, and so forth. And so it's received, I don't know, 5,000 downloads or something ever since we put it up a few weeks ago. So it's getting a lot of attention, and then we're piloting that in 3 school districts. Right now it's starting right now in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and then Chicago and Denver. And what we're doing is capturing the struggles in trying to implement it, because it is sort of one of those units that will require professional development support and so forth in order to implement it appropriately. And it's not like, you know, we don't have the capacity to build it out, but we will be offering some resources in math, just as ways of engaging with organizations like larger school districts to implement. And then sort of up in the policy space, which is the higher up things, we work with the Council of Chief State School Officers to work on both around the standards area. So there's an effort at the Council of Chief State School Officers to develop a set of standards around English language proficiency. And the ELPD framework was an important piece of that. And also with the developers of Smarter Balanced and PARC assessments to look at the language components of them. And you'll see a lot of it. You know, we have a very active website that gets sort of updated, and so you'll see a lot of the products of what we're doing on the website. So I think I'm getting the hook, and so I don't know if there's time for questions. 2 minutes, right? But stay informed. I think that was the last slide, right? There it is. So feel free to email us, come to our website, whatever. So, all right, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hakuta, from all of us, and we greatly appreciate your leadership and your commitment in leading this Understanding Language initiative to provide valuable resources for the nation in terms of addressing the needs of our bilingual learners in accessing the Common Core state standards. So on behalf of the NABE Executive Board, I would like to present you with a pin, which means that you are now a NABE honorary lifetime member, and also as a token of appreciation, you will also receive a plaque. So let me give you the pin first.
Oh, okay.
So this is the pin, our NABE
Thank
pin.
you.
So,
Should I put it on?
okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Put
okay.
it on.
It's like being a million-mile flyer or something. Oops, I'm going to drop this. Okay, thank you.
And also in your plaque. Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank
All right,
you very
thank you.
much.
All
Okay,
right,
great.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay,
Okay,
great. Thank you.
thank you. All right. I can
Okay.
stay around for questions if you
Yes,
want,
we can
or
stay for questions.
mhm,
Yes. Okay, great. This event would not be made possible without the support of our valued sponsors. We want to express our sincere gratitude, and we invite you to join us next year in beautiful San Diego, California for our annual conference. So see you soon, and enjoy the conference. All right, great, thank you. If you have any questions for Dr. Hakuta, so please come up to the front, and then we will have some questions and answers time. Yes.
Hello? Can I get your attention for 1 quick minute, please? Last year, we had a successful raffle of some iPads. We have the raffle again this year. It's available tomorrow in the NABE booth right after the opening keynote address. Go to the NABE booth. You can sign up, drop your card or note in the booth, and we will be raffling iPads throughout the day. Thank you very much.